Management. Ted, good morning. Thank you so much for joining me. So we have a slew of economic data pouring in this morning. We got consumer sentiment, which was reported yesterday. At the same time, we saw ADP come in lower than expected. And of course, that Q1 GDP report, the first reading, contracting. So take us through the economy's vital signs.
A great point, and it is good to be with you. Consumer confidence is down. Consumer sentiment has trended really poorly as well. I think you well noted because of the tariffs and all the uncertainty in the markets. And I think that it had a huge exclamation point this morning with that GDP contraction release. I mean, this is the data that Jerome Powell is going to be looking at next week. And unfortunately, I think it seems probable that he's not going to do anything. That inflation number has still trended above his 2% target. And really, we haven't seen any meaningful moves in the negative sense when it comes to the labor market yet. And so I think if I had to make a prediction about next week, it seems as likely to me that Powell won't do very much at all. And we might even get some more chirping from the president, calling Jerome Powell Mr. Too Late. If we're seeing a GDP contraction, I think we might hear that one again.
And of course, looking ahead to Friday, we will be getting the employment report for this month, and we will be paying attention not just to the headline figure, which is non-farm payrolls, but also details, including the unemployment rate. So what are your expectations as we head into the Friday report? And of course, what do you make of the other labor market data we've seen so far this week, including JOLTS?
I think at the end of the day, the projection, at least when I think about consumer sentiment specifically, is I believe the figure is that the consumer as a whole is expecting the worst job data, and it's as bleak of an outlook as it has been actually since 2009, at least the expectations for it to rise. So I think that we are going to start to see that tick down. I mean, obviously, there is some correlation potentially there with the GDP estimations coming down. And so, that general trend, I do think will be a weakening. We're starting to see some of that. But at the end of the day, until we see, I would say, more meaningful moves, it's just not going to give Powell what he's looking for yet. We're just not seeing it.
And I do want to ask you about the Dallas Fed survey, which showed U.S. manufacturers concerned about the economy. So what do you expect to see, not just at the May meeting for the Fed, but also as we look forward to the rest of 2025?
Yeah, I think that the bigger picture with the Fed direction is that they're getting, I would say, a tremendous amount of pressure coming from multiple angles. Of course, we have the political pressure coming from the Trump administration, which really has been there since Trump was reelected. But that being paired with a whole bunch of societal pressure, whether that be from, the example you gave with the manufacturing, but just, I think normal Americans, looking for that American dream, trying to buy homes, get relief on their debt. I think that we will see an open of lowering as we round out 2025. But I think that Jerome Powell wants to be right in that decision, and he is waiting until he's certain it's okay to lower. So I'm not really expecting very much until really the second half of 2025. Hopefully, we get those 2 or 3 cuts. If we end up getting what Jerome Powell mentioned at his last meeting. But all of our ears, of course, will be listening very closely what he says next week.
And of course, when it comes to headlines, we continue to monitor the latest headlines that come through from the president as well as social media. And so far, Commerce Secretary Lutnick saying that the U.S. has a deal in place with an unnamed country. So if you could take us through where the markets stand when it comes to clarity and the evolving global trade situation, as well as your perspective here.
Well, obviously, with the tariffs, we've had this toll booth thrown into all of our world trade. And the problem has been is we don't know what to expect. The market doesn't have clarity. And when the market is uncertain, it hates that just about as much as anything, economic data, even aside. And so I think when we hear something like that from Lutnick saying, hey, we have deals, and we've heard, and kind of hint at some of that, and some softening on the discussion with China, I think that all those, probably are part of what drove some of that rally last week. But in order for price stability to actually permeate and to get back to, I'll say some more stability, more normal, we're going to need to see those pens hit paper. We're going to need to see these trade deals in action so the market can have confidence in what to expect going forward. And if we compare that with the data that Powell is looking for to start that lowering cycle, is what I would highlight is really that formula for stability, in the medium and long term for sure.
Okay, Ted, well, we will have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us this morning as we wrap up quite a volatile month.
Thank you.